Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And let's be honest, what makes your business successful is money. This is not a hobby. And I think that's one of the things that so many people get caught up in is they love what they do and they don't stop to think, I need to make money. And so then it is just a hobby for them. And so today we're going to be talking about how do we make it a successful business and how is it that we are able to earn the money and set ourselves up to be an ongoing entity. So please join me in welcoming Christopher Volk to our program today. Welcome, Chris. How are you doing?
Well, Deb, I couldn't be any better, and it's so nice to be with you and your audience today, and thanks for having me on the show.
Great. Well, let me tell people just a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into this. So Christopher Volk is a rare three-peat public company leader. He took his first company public in 1994 and later started and led two other companies, which went public in 2004 and 2014. So he does know a little something about creating and designing a business. Together, his three companies outperformed the broader markets, invested over $20 billion in real estate across the country, and attracted some noted shareholders, including Berkshire Hathaway. He stepped away at the end of 2021 to write, teach, and help other businesses to be successful. Foremost on his list is to guide current and future leaders on the elements of business model design. Business models don't just happen, they have to be crafted. The world's wealthiest people universally owe their net worths to business ownership, or maybe inheriting that. But what differentiates their success is often centered in the business models they deploy. He is the author of The Value Equation, a business guide to wealth creation for entrepreneurs, leaders, and investors. Using his V formula, entrepreneurs can determine in advance their company's pre-tax return on equity and wealth creation potential, as well as a lot of other things. So again, Chris, welcome.
Well, Deb, it's great to be here, and that was a fabulous description. I wasn't expecting that much.
I love it. I love it. I had one person send me a 7-page intro. I'm like, no, that's a little bit too long. And then I've had people send me 2 sentences, and so it's always interesting what I get. But I think one of the things that I always think about when I read somebody's bio is how did they get to where they are today? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, when I was in college, I didn't even take a single business class. So I studied history and I studied French. Mm-hmm. I missed the whole business thing. It wasn't a complete waste because you're learning how to write and you're learning how to think, right. And you're learning how to persuade people of your points of view, and all that is very helpful in any career that you might go into. But when I got out, I decided I wanted to be in business, and I sent out 350 resumes. Now, this is in 1979. I graduated.
So these were printed resumes on the fancy paper that they told us to use.
They were printed resumes, and I was hand typing. There were no computers back then, so the first PC didn't come out until 1981. So I'm hand typing all these cover letters and sending them out to people and to HR departments to 350 companies. I mean, the companies range from anything from selling pet food to doing publishing. And the best thing that happened to me, and of course, in 1979, for most of your audience wasn't probably around in 1979, but in 1979, it was like a pretty serious recession. It was as good a recession as you can imagine. And so people weren't lining up to hire people, and they certainly weren't lining up hire European history and French undergraduate guys.
Yeah.
So I got turned down by basically everyone. And
350 times.
I did. And in a way, in hindsight, people always talk about the luck in their careers, and it's always good to be lucky at certain points in time. And one of the luckiest things that happened to me was basically that I got turned down by 350 people. And the reason it was lucky is because it gave me time to sit back and think, okay, I'm messing up here. What do I need to do? And where should I start? Because had I gotten almost any job, I was so desperate to have any job that I might have just taken it without really thinking about what am I good at? I mean, how do I know what I'm good at? And I would tell you that one of the really key things for successful people in any field is to sort of figure out what is it you're good at. And most of us, or many of us, never really get a chance to find out, because we do take that first job where it takes us a lot longer to find out what we're good at. So here I was, not knowing what I was good at, not being able to sell myself too well. And I moved to Atlanta, kind of where you're residing there. I had a job selling clothes in a men's clothing store, and I decided that the place I was wanting to start was a commercial bank. And the reason I wanted to start in banking was because I figured, since I know so little about business, if I'm in a bank and I'm seeing all kinds of companies, if I could lend money to companies or study them, I might be able to learn a lot about what people do on this world, and I might be able to learn something about business, and I need to know this stuff. So, and because nobody was going to hire a European history and French major voluntarily, let's say, I went to Georgia State University at night school and started taking accounting classes just to sort of make it look like I was pretty serious about this.
You knew a little bit more.
A little more, And so there were, let's say, 6 major commercial banks in Atlanta at the time, and I got one of them to hire me, and that started my career. And I decided, as I got there, to steer the career. I mean, one of the important things for anybody in their career is to kind of guide their own career the best they can. And so, in the banking world, I didn't want to go into the branch banking system. I didn't want to go into the marketing department. I wanted to go into heavy-duty commercial lending and to go into financial statement analysis. And so I took all the financial statement analysis classes. I ended up in the credit department studying companies for 4 years. I was the secretary to loan committee, which meant that I got to take all the minutes, but I got to see all these deals. So in my early 20s, mid-20s, I was seeing all kinds of transactions, and I was known by people that were much higher up in the bank. And it gave me a big perspective on what's out there and what do people do for a living. And perhaps foremost, it taught me that no two companies are created equal. Some companies are just better than others, and they have better business models. And that could be because they could sell their products to more people. It could be because they have better profit margins. But whatever it was, they were able to create better wealth for people. And I figured this out early on in banking. And I did this banking thing for about 6 years. And I decided that I had to leave banking. And I just to give you a story. I was out of the credit department. I was starting to make loans. And early on in the cable television industry, people were building cable TV everywhere. And I convinced the bank to lend money on a cable television system in of all places, Mobile, Alabama. And the bank did this. But the thing about a cable TV loan is that there's really no collateral for it, because all the wiring's under the ground. So if what you're paying for, if you had to rip the wire out of the ground, you couldn't sell it for anything.
The bank doesn't get anything if they default on the loan.
And bankers love collateral. So they really would like to have inventory, accounts receivable. They want to have real estate. Something. And I was giving them sort of this true cash flow type loan. And so as I got out of the loan committee, having won this transaction, having convinced the bank to do this, I'm thinking to myself, if this thing goes bad, I mean, it could be a career limiting move for me. I mean, and since it's the only cable TV loan in the whole bank, I could be having a short-lived career. And I thought to myself, in banking, oftentimes there's a lot of comfort in doing the exact same kind of loan as everybody else does, because if you do that, and then everybody's loans go bad, and you're sitting at a bar during a Great Recession with all your fellow bankers, and you're looking at each other and saying, "Oh, wow, I didn't see this coming, and that was a bad loan." But one of y'all is going to be president, and but the guy who made the cable TV loan, he's not getting to be president,
right?
And so
he's there all by himself,
right. And I thought, the other problem with banking was that all banks, by and large, tend to be big organizations. So our bank wasn't big at all, but we had 1,000 employees. So trying to be a senior leader in any company with 1,000 employees takes a lot of ability to network your way through all that. And I thought, I'm just not the guy that's going to be doing this. I need to work for a smaller business. And so I decided to work in a smaller business. And I decided that I wanted to work for a company that had a decent business model. And I started going through my Rolodexes, and I decided I wanted to be in finance because I liked finance. I figured out that I was actually really good at it. Having been a credit geek for 4 years at the bank, and then having lent money, I was pretty good at it. And I started writing, by the way, early on, and I got some articles published even when I was at the bank. And so one of my customers was out in Arizona, and they were a financial services company. And what they did was they owned real estate, and they would rent the real estate to people that used it. So a tenant could decide, gee, I want to own my own real estate. So we dealt with, at the time, we were doing a fast food restaurant chain. So you could have a Taco Bell franchisee who'd say, I just really want to own this real estate, and I'm going to go to a bank and finance it. But we would convince people that really having a landlord might be better off than having a banker, because your returns could be better. There were a lot of, there was just a little bit
more
of math
flexibility.
in it, but we thought it would give them more flexibility to not own the real estate and have us own it. And so that's what the company did. And they had a pretty decent business model. One of the great things about it at the time was that they had no debt on any of their real estate, so it was all debt free. So that almost the world could just fall apart, and we had no risk, really. I mean, even if some of our tenants didn't pay us, since we had no debt, there was not like we weren't going to have lenders unhappy with us or anything. And so anyway, my wife and I picked up from Atlanta and moved to Arizona. And, over the years, the person who started that company became my first true mentor, I guess. And so people would say, you got so lucky to have him, and there was some fortune in having him. On the other hand, I picked him, I mean, I went there intentionally and picked him. And in fact, I took a job with no pay increase. Like I after 6 years at the bank, I went and took another job with no pay increase because, to me, I realized at that point in my career, it was not really about the money. The money would come eventually, but at that point in my career, I had to learn stuff. He was somebody I was going to learn from. And so I did this, and I think this is really important for people starting out and you're thinking about what you want to do and who you pick out. So so I think that having picked him was less lucky than it would seem, because I was really intentional on my part. And so several years later, I'm working at his business, and we had all this real estate, and we ran out of money at one point. And so I put myself and he put me in charge of helping to raise money from institutional investors. And I went into him one day and said, why don't we just take this thing public on the New York Stock Exchange? I mean, just like list the whole thing. And so what we did was we took us 2 years to get this done. But what we did was we took our 150,000 investors, and we took 11 partnerships, and we smushed them all together, and we listed this thing on the New York Stock Exchange in 1994. And I became president of the company, and grew it. And I went and got the rating agencies to give us rated debt, and so I learned a lot of stuff. I mean, I was self-taught. Nobody taught me how to do this. I mean, the thing is, if you are a leader, you kind of have to teach yourself a lot of
Right.
this stuff. I mean, there's
Mhm.
no sort of school for learning everything, absolutely
Mhm.
everything it takes to run a
Yeah,
business.
and that's the hard challenge with all of it.
No, yeah, right. I mean, so you're thinking about what you do and strategy
Mhm.
and in a way, sort of having been a history major was pretty good for that stuff
Mhm.
because you're thinking about strategic things and where should I go next? How
Mhm.
do I solve this problem?
Mhm.
And by the way, all these businesses and if you're doing a career,
Mhm.
the people that solve the problems are the people that get
Mhm.
promoted. I mean, if
Right.
so, so
Mhm.
if you can solve problems, not just spot the problems, but you can
Mhm.
fix them as well. I
Mhm.
mean, then those are the people that end up rising to leadership
Mhm.
positions, and so I became kind of good at that. But anyway, we grew that company. We sold it to GE Capital, and
Mhm.
Jack Welch, who was a
Mhm.
seminal leader at GE Capital, was the last company he bought,
Mhm.
and I would say, well, he was seminal until he wasn't because the GE's stock ended up dropping pretty precipitously and never
Mhm.
rebounded. But anyway, so we were part of GE, and I knew that I couldn't stay there
Mhm.
because there was no real job for me. I mean, I was used to running a small business, and
Mhm.
I had a company that I was running, and it had 250 employees,
Mhm.
and here was GE had
Right. Now
350,000
you're just kind
employees,
of this
and
tiny little cog.
yeah, and I was just a cog in the wheel at GE, and I wasn't a GE person. So GE
Mhm.
was very big on having internal GE
Right.
experience, and I
Mhm.
didn't
Mhm.
have that. And so a year and a half later, I'm out of the door, and
Mhm.
at the age of 47, I had this choice: do I, go work for somebody else,
Mhm.
or do I start a business?
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know. I mean, you've obviously started your company, and
Mhm.
you were inspired to do this. And I think that why people start companies is always a little different,
Mhm.
but probably in the back of a lot of people's minds is I don't want to go through my life like not having given it a
Mhm.
shot. I mean, I
Right.
had this chance to start
Mhm.
something. People know who I am. I've got
Mhm.
this Rolodex out
Mhm.
there where I can go out and call on people and tap, possibly raise money.
Mhm.
And so I got the guy who founded the first company, and he and I started another company,
Mhm.
and we raised money in 2003, and
Mhm.
we actually went public in 2004. So a year later, we took the company public,
Mhm.
and grew that until 2007, and we sold it. But that company also was owning real estate and renting
Mhm.
it to people, and much of our staff came from the first company. So our
Mhm.
CFO came from the first
Mhm.
company, and the head of sales came
Mhm.
from the first company. And you were talking to me before the show that your husband's had one job in his life, which is
Mhm.
like unusual. I mean,
Right. Mhm.
starting and retiring with one job.
Mhm.
Um, I had I've almost had two jobs essentially
Mhm.
because what I did was I left the bank. That's my
Mhm.
first job. I went to Arizona, so that's my
Mhm.
second job. But when I started my first company, I was doing it with the same people I was
Right.
with
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
first company. So in a way, it was like a continuation of
Mhm.
the
I
second
love
job I
that.
had.
Mhm.
Only we were doing it with people. And anyway, we sold that company, and eventually I would
Mhm.
leave it in 2010. And um, and in 2011, I started the third company, and with many of the same people, by the
Mhm.
way, who were with me at the second and
Mhm.
the first company.
Mhm.
And so you're working with a lot of the same folks, and
Mhm.
I think it was so good because you had a team of people and you've got complementary skill sets. You
Right.
know what each other's good at.
Mhm.
You can trust them.
Mhm. Mhm.
You have mutual trust in terms of what you're going to get done, and so it made it so easy. I think that when you're starting a business, but you're starting with a team of people you don't
Mhm.
know, I think it's a little more challenging. But anyway, so we started the third company, and the third company was the best. I mean, you just get better at this stuff, and
Mhm.
so I got better at knowing what it took to build a business and
Mhm.
how to put it together and how to create the business
Mhm.
model around it. And so, by the time I left the third company, we were, gosh, our equity value on the New York Stock Exchange
Mhm.
was 5 times the value of the first company, and
Wow.
so we were close to $10
Mhm.
billion in value. We'd
Mhm.
sold 10% of the stock to Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway.
Mhm.
We were running, 5 times the assets with half the people that we had in
Mhm.
the first company.
Mhm.
So we had just made a better business model, and I left to write a book and to be on your podcast and to teach people on the importance of how you think about creating a business and how you put it together. And because, 2/3 of millionaires in the US, and I'm sure the world, made their money from business. They weren't just sitting there clipping their 401ks, working for companies. I mean,
they didn't win the lottery.
No, they made their money in business, and that comes at different levels. That doesn't mean they were all entrepreneurs and they started it. They had stock in companies. It's one thing to save money, and we're all told to control our spending and save money. But it's another thing to be a two-fisted saver, which a two-fisted saver is the person who is saving money on the one hand, but then also getting stock in the company they work for on the other hand. So you're actually having two ways to save, which really increases your odds of becoming a millionaire. But the truth of it all is that most of the world's businesses aren't worth more than they cost to make. So people are basically buying a job. They're working for themselves. They're buying a job. Could they sell the company for more than they have in it? No, not necessarily. I mean, they're able to save money, and they might become millionaires because they're saving money and paying down debt associated with their business and so on. But can they sell it for more than they pay for it? No, not necessarily. And so I was interested in what does it take to be able to create a business and sell it for more than it cost. Because if you look at the Forbes 400, not that I'm anywhere close to that, but if you look at the Forbes 400, those 400 people, a handful inherited their money, but most of them made their own money. And by the way, the handful that inherited their money inherited them from other Forbes 400 people.
And then they built on it.
And those net worths all stemmed from really solid businesses that had great business models and that were worth well more than they cost to create. So, and you look at a company like Apple, which is the world's most valuable company, it's worth about 11 times more than it cost to create. So if you look at the equity value of Apple, it's worth 11 times more than the equity cost. And that equity, by the way, isn't just the money that Steve Jobs and Wozniak put together and cobbled together in the garage. It's not just the money that they got from venture capital after that. It is the money the company reinvested in itself, and it's not just the money from the IPO that they did, but it's the money that they reinvested in themselves, and they've been throwing off all kinds of cash and reinvesting it in the business. And today the business is worth 11 times more than it cost to create. Now, the company I ran, real estate company, was worth 1.4 times what it cost to create.
But still, it was worth more. I mean, that's the thing.
It was worth more, right? So that's by the way, that's 40%. So which is a heck of a thing. I mean, we're not taking a whole lot of risk. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're not creating a cure for cancer. We're not creating the next high-tech thing. We're just buying a bunch of real estate and just doing it really well and creating a company that's worth 40% more than it costs to create. But now, if you have a company that's not worth more than it costs to create, let's say your return is 10% a year. So you're giving out people 10% a year.
Right.
10% a year, if you're an investor, that's a heck of a number. That's if you could say to people, okay, you can make 10% a year for forever or something like that, that's a great number. But if it turns out that the average investor expects 10%, right, then if you have the company making 10%, you can't sell it for more than it costs because basically the new investor wanted 10% too.
Right.
It's even. So you're making a good return, but it's even. And so in our case, that's kind of what the cost of equity was. It was kind of like 10% because that's what most stock market people expect because the S&P 500 has done about 10% a year since it was started.
That's the average.
And so you got to get to be above average, so if you're making like 12%, instead of 10%, now you're worth, that's where you get to be worth, 20, 30, 40% more than you cost to create, and so we were able to generate returns higher than our investors wanted, which is how, we got people like Warren Buffett to invest with us. So while our business model was not anywhere near as good as Apple's, by the time I left, our equity value was almost $10 billion, which meant that we created $4 billion worth of wealth from thin air. I mean, that's a pretty good number,
Yeah, and that's B with that's the B word, billion.
Yes, a B. So and so, what I'd like to teach people is, well, how do you do this? I mean, how do you think about this so that you can create companies that are worth more than they cost to create, and you don't have to have the best business model in the world to become a multimillionaire, but you're not going to, by the way, ever be a multimillionaire almost certainly without investing in business. I mean, just almost impossible.
Right.
I mean, if you think about what it takes to save $1 million, it's hard to save $1 million. If you think about what it takes to save 2 million, it's like so hard. If you think about people that are worth 5 or 10 million, I mean, almost nobody can save that kind of money. So the only way you get to be worth 5 or 10 million is to have other people working for you and create a business, have a business behind you. So you have to have a business engine. And how do you get that? You got to make a company worth more than it costs. Simple.
Right. I love all of this. And it's one of those things that I think so many people just don't even really think about when they're starting a business. I was kind of joking at the start about it being a hobby, but that's what it is for many people. They're like, ooh, I like doing this. I'm good at doing this. I should get paid to do this, right? Totally. And so then they launch this business, and the problem is they do zero planning. And that's one of the biggest things that I think causes what is it? Half of all small businesses fail because they don't stop and plan. They don't stop to think, even just the basics. What are my general operating costs? What do I need? Do I need employees? Do I need a marketing plan? All of those things, because they go into it because this is their passion. And unfortunately, all those other things come in. And, and of course, the thing is, they've got this little thing that they like to do. They've got their passion, and they have no knowledge about something else. And so that's where your book and what you do and other resources are so valuable, because we can't know everything. And, and we were, I was joking with you before the program. No, this is not my realm of understanding. And so I rely on other people to work with me on the financial stuff. And I think that's the thing that so many people don't realize is they have to plan. They have to be doing these things, or their business is going to be one of those thousands, hundreds of thousands that fail every year.
Right. So several years back, as I'm running the company, we would do these conferences for our customers. And part of the reason for doing the conference is to educate your customers. I mean, to make them better customers. I have a view that it's just really important to give back and as much as you can. So you want to do business with your customers, but it's got to be a win-win proposition all the way around. And the best companies, one of the things I just love about business is that businesses that are good are almost invariably like this, because they're mutually beneficial. I mean, they help their customers, they help their employees and their shareholders, they help their communities. I mean, they're just good companies just win for so many people. So there's a virtuous thing in business that I've always liked. But anyway, so at this conference, we have Damon John come talk. And Damon John, for those of you who don't know Damon, he's a pretty interesting guy, and he got famous by being on Shark Tank for a long time.
Yes.
And where he made his money was he made his money selling hip hop clothing. He was basically, he had limited amount of formal education, but he saw a kind of a need for hip hop clothing, and how he started his company is just kind of a great story. But anyway, when he's getting started early on, he goes to a conference, a clothing conference, I guess, or basically it's a conference for where buyers will buy clothing, so department stores or whatever. So it was a retailer type conference for companies who are wanting to sell their products to various retailers. And he comes away with something like $10 million in orders, or I
Wow.
mean, maybe it wasn't that high. It was,
Hmm.
I'm sorry, it was, but let's say it was $1
A
million of
lot.
orders or
Hmm.
$2 million of
Hmm.
orders, which is for a company that doesn't exist, it's like a really
Right.
big
That's a
number,
lot. Hmm.
And so he's working out of his, he and his mother owned a house.
Hmm.
Um, he was a hustler, and he had
Hmm.
basically made money and scraped together money and he helped his mother buy a house,
Hmm.
and the two of them lived in this house together. And he, uh, so he cobbles together some money. He wants to get a bank to lend him money
Hmm.
because he's got $10 million in orders.
Right. He's got these big
He's
orders he's
flat,
got to
or
fulfill. Hmm.
2 million
Hmm.
in orders,
Hmm.
whatever it is. And he's flashing the orders around to
Hmm.
banks, and no one will lend him anything
Hmm.
because it's just orders. I mean,
Right.
okay, I
And
can't
he's
lend
this
you money
unknown
on
entity.
right. So what he does is he gets a second mortgage on his house, or a home
Hmm.
equity line on his house,
Hmm.
and he borrows $150,000, and he goes and buys sewing machines, like
Hmm.
6 sewing machines,
Hmm.
and then he buys a lot of fabric.
Hmm.
Because when he went to the conference, he had these mock-up hip hop clothing,
Hmm.
but he only had like one of each. I mean, he didn't have anything.
And no way to
That's all
produce more.
that's
Hmm.
all he had. So he didn't have it, and no way to produce more. And
Hmm.
his mother had taught him how to sew,
Hmm.
and so he's there with a group with his employees. He's got the sewing machines, and they're
Hmm.
sewing like crazy, creating this order,
Hmm.
and put the order together, package it up, and ship it off.
Hmm.
And then Damon goes, well, he creates an invoice for the customer,
Hmm.
and gives them 60 days to pay
Hmm.
him.
Seems
And
generous. Hmm.
so he wanted to give generous terms. He thought that
Hmm.
he wants them to come back.
Hmm.
60
Hmm.
days seemed like a good thing to do. But what he didn't think about was he didn't have enough money to
Yeah.
make
What
it
do you do in that
60
60
days.
day time period? Hmm.
I mean, so he spent all this money,
Hmm.
created all this stuff, but he
Hmm.
didn't have enough money to bridge the 60 days.
Hmm.
And what he did was he converted all of this labor and all
Hmm.
of this material, all this
Hmm.
inventory, he'd converted it into, he basically traded it out for
Hmm.
a note receivable, an account
Right.
receivable. So,
Hmm.
so, so he'd given up one asset.
Hmm.
He got another asset that was
Hmm.
more valuable because he had to mark
Hmm.
up on the asset and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But he did a swap,
Hmm.
but he still had no money,
Hmm.
and the thing about money that's important is that businesses don't go out of business because they lose money.
Right.
They go out of business because they run out of cash.
Right. Yeah. He had
And
employees that needed paid. He had,
and it's
all sorts of things
right.
that needed money. Hmm.
So Damon's going to run out of cash,
Hmm.
and so and this is pre-internet and pre-social
Hmm.
media, so
Right. So he
the
wasn't
audience
doing
has to
GoFundMe
appreciate
or, yeah.
has to
Hmm.
appreciate this stuff.
Uh-huh.
So Damon, with some of the last money he's got, goes and does a classified ad in the New York Times or something like
Hmm.
that, and basically says, company with X millions of dollars in orders
Hmm.
needs financing, and
Hmm.
and call Damon,
Hmm.
something
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
And so he gets called by like Samsung or
Hmm.
some other company, and who basically lends him the money. So basically, his
That's a pretty
his buying
risky
the classified
venture.
ad bails him out, because
Hmm.
he would have been inches away from
Right.
insolvency and from
Hmm.
bankruptcy. And so when I listened to Damon's story, and by
Hmm.
the way, Damon tells the story to anybody that will listen.
Hmm.
And when I listened to the story, I thought, what Damon didn't really
Hmm.
understand was, what is business investment? I
Hmm.
mean,
Hmm.
because business investment is what it takes to start a business, and
Hmm.
it includes your sewing machines, and it
Hmm.
includes the material you got to
Hmm.
have.
Hmm.
It, by the way, includes excess cash. You got to have a
Right.
cushion,
Yeah. Because you
so
never know
there's
when something might
you
happen.
never know
Hmm.
what's going to happen. But guess what else it includes? It includes the account receivable that you got to
Hmm.
carry for 60
Hmm.
days, right?
Hmm.
Which is another investment that you're
Hmm.
having to make. And he's a guy who like put together this company that,
Hmm.
based on things he wanted to do, he
Hmm.
saw a need.
His passion.
It was a passion for
Hmm.
him, and but never bothered to think about what is business
Hmm.
investment. And so there are 6 things that you got to focus on,
Hmm.
numerical things you got to focus on when
Hmm.
it comes to generating
Hmm.
shareholder returns. And one of the most important ones is, what is business investment?
Right.
How do I total this thing up? And so I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to write this book, but I'm going to start it off with Damon because, so I think Damon's chapter 3, but basically you go into that and say, what is business investment? So you describe what it takes to actually total up a business investment that people have to have, and it's not that hard to understand. And then you can go into the other variables it takes to make money for shareholders and do them one at a time. And so that's what I did, because basically it's there's math to it. And Deb, you've made it clear to me that math is not basically
2
down
and
your
2
strike
don't
zone.
always make 4.
Right. But the thing is, the good news is that people who are entrepreneurs and they're starting out businesses, they don't need to be math wizards.
Right.
And almost, the vast majority of people who are financially successful aren't math wizards, but they know enough, and all the math in finance is all middle school math. I mean, it's stuff you learned in the 8th grade. It's not stuff you learned in high school. It's not stuff you learn in college. It's like 8th grade stuff. And so you got to brush off your 8th grade, math
percentages,
skills.
it's
ninth grade,
fractions,
9th grade. And math, maybe but 8th and 7th grade math skills, you got to brush those things off and then put them together, and you can create a business model. And so that's what I try to do for people.
Right. And the cool thing is, because it is math, there are formulas, there are strategies, there's all these things that exist that people can put their information into. Nobody is starting completely from scratch. And so they can look at your formulas. They can go, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and so I've got this that is the outcome from it. And I think that's, there are so many people, they just don't, and I'll be honest, I am one of those people. I'm like, that just seems way too complicated. But it's not. It is, as you said, it's basic math, but it takes actually sitting down and thinking about stuff and realizing what's going on. You mentioned in your book that one of the things that Damon didn't realize was, when he ordered his fabric, it was not something, because he needed like lots and lots and lots, right? And it wasn't something he could get right away. So then there's that lag time, and there are these things that people just need to sit and think about. Maybe you're going to open, a landscaping business. Okay. Some of that is pretty simple, but you don't even think about it. What time of year are you wanting to start this? I mean, if I'm from Colorado, opening a landscaping business in, say, January, might not be a good idea unless part of what you're providing is shoveling snow. And so just all of these plans. And then, is it seasonal? Do you have to ramp up? Many years ago, I worked for a candy broker. Coolest job in the world, especially to my dad, because he got lots of chocolate. But we ran on about a 6-month cycle. So for Christmas, the candy that we were pitching people to buy, because we were kind of the intermediary, right? Andy's Chocolates was one of ours. And so we were pitching Christmas in July, literally. And so, we needed our Christmas stuff in July, and so that meant the manufacturer had to have the Christmas stuff in July. And so it's just kind of knowing some of those basics that a lot of people just don't stop and think through.
No, you're building up massive amounts of inventory in July, and that becomes a part of your business investment. So you've got to be doing that. And then of course you're having to carry your staff payroll wise for all these months where you're not really making any money. And this is true in the candy business, because it is a very seasonal type businesses. And there are certain holidays where the candy companies just make all their money. When the thing about business models for me, I guess why it happened better for me, or that, sort of like the importance of business models really hit home for me, was because to start the companies I started, I needed a lot of money. I mean, real estate, unfortunately,
real estate is a big chunk of change.
It's a big chunk of change, right? So, the last company I started, when I was starting Store Capital in 2011, I went into a company and I basically asked them for $1 billion investment. So I need from a third party investor, I needed $1 billion. I needed to show up with $1 billion.
Oi.
They turned me down, but they gave me 500 million. So it was
okay. So you got half.
Yeah, right. So I got half, and no, it was more than enough to start the business. But the point of this is, by the way, if you're raising money, and especially if you're addressing a big market, don't be shy about asking for a lot, because people
you
like
might
to know
only
you have
get
a vision.
half.
But also but people appreciate that there's an opportunity to invest $1 billion. I mean, if you say, well, I just want to raise $10 million, it's like, this is such a small amount for the company's
it's not worth our time.
But here I was asking for an awful lot of money. So especially large institutional investors like this stuff. But anyway, if you're going to go out and raise money from people, you definitely have to put together a business model. They will not give you a nickel without this. So now the good news is that there are something like 10,000 private equity firms in the United States. When I graduated from college in 1979, there were about 0. So you've gone from 0 to 10,000, and there are boatloads of them, and they have boatloads of money, and all the money is green. It's all the same color. What's not the same color are the management teams that they back. And I think that having good management teams and having good ideas is harder to get than the money. So if you have like a good team of people and a good idea, and by the way, you can create a decent business model to articulate that idea, then you have a chance to raise a significant amount of money from investors willing to back you. Because you're a rare commodity, you're unusual, and so, but you have to be able to raise money from outside investors. For sure, it takes a business model understanding to get that done. If you're doing your own company and your own hobby, and you're cobbling together money from friends and family, and maybe your own money, that's where you could be sort of a little bit less disciplined. You don't necessarily need to have a business model in place. But if you want to create a company that's worth more than it costs, and you want to see financially, what can this company do? Like, how well could I get this thing done? Then it really helps to sort of put together a business model and craft it, because you take a look at like Damon John. He ordered the inventory from overseas. It took a long time.
It was literally coming by slow boat.
Because he was an unknown commodity, he had to prepay for the inventory. Like, he actually had to pay for it in advance.
He was very high risk.
Because nobody was going to give it to him. So that's basically another investment, which is called a prepaid. So you're making this prepaid deal. Where one day it's my cash, the next day it's their cash, and I have no inventory at all. I still have to wait for the inventory to come. But as Damon grew this company, and I'm not privy to how he did his business, but it's possible that he could get the provider of the material to also perhaps make the clothing for him. Like, he could potentially outsource a lot of the sewing that he was doing in the basement of his mother's house. And then, as time went on and he became more of a known commodity, he could probably get them to do it without prepaying for anything. So you can get them to like actually carry it. So he'd have an account payable. Accounts payable are great because it's free money.
But it's still due. I mean, that's the thing. You got to pay it at some point.
It's due, but it's like, but you have to show up with less cash up front, which I mean, and of course, conserving cash is so important. When I think about what is business investment, I think about taking all the stuff I got to have, whether it's prepaids or inventory or sewing machines in the case of Damon, and then you subtract money that's free money that you get from people. So free money might be like a deposit, if a customer gives you a deposit, or free money might be an account payable because it's free money from a trade vendor, or free money could be from your own employees who get paid like every other week. So basically you don't have to pay them right away. So
you've got a little float time almost.
So that's free money. So you basically take all the stuff you got to have, subtract the free money, and what you're left with is the amount you got to fund with either borrowing money or showing up with equity. I mean, basically just if people won't lend you enough money, then you got to show up. You got to find the money from shareholders. I mean, and that's equity, and that's the money that Steve Jobs and Wozniak cobbled together to start
Mhm.
Apple, whatever you have to have personal money that's in the deal.
Right.
And in my case, the equity piece of it was coming from right away. It was coming from third-party investors, and for to do that, I had to have that business model in hand to be able to convince them to part with their money.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things that people have to plan. You can't go in with your cocktail napkin and say, hey, I've got this great idea. And we were talking before the program, some of the basics of a business model is how are you going to function? Are you going to be like Walmart and sell a lot of products at a lower price? Are you going to be somebody like, say, Mercedes and sell fewer products at a higher price? And all of those things for me, from a marketing background, I think of it as niching, right? We have to figure out where our niche is. I am not going to sell what I sell to everybody. I give this example, a lot on the program where, you ask somebody, who is your market? And they smile at you and they say, everybody. No, Walmart doesn't sell to everybody. Mercedes-Benz does not sell to everybody. You have to figure out your niche. And the example that I use is this woman who sold skincare products. And, she was, it was one of those where it was not Mary Kay, but something similar like that. Right. And, we were in a networking thing, and who's your perfect client? And she said, everybody, because makes sense, right? Everybody has skin. But what she was selling, we could not get our head around who we could refer her to, or even who we were buying from, or, and so I worked with her a little bit, and I said, okay, you need a niche. And so what her niche was teenage boys who have acne. And now, we were not teenage boys who had acne, but we all knew teenage boys who had acne. And so we could refer to her. Did that mean that that the product was not sold to 30-year-old women who had acne? No, same thing kind of worked. But, when she figured out who her niche was, then she knew how to price it, how to market it, how to sell it, all of those things. And that's just where that's a big part of your business plan is you are not selling your product to everybody.
No. Totally not. I mean, that's exactly right. And as you're crafting a business plan, there's so many different ways that you can run your business. I mean, so you can hire employees, you can outsource, you can. Damon could have had his clothing not made here; it could have been made elsewhere. He could have gotten better terms on his trade. He could have sold and asked the people who are buying not to pay it in 60 days, but he could have asked for it to be paid in 15 days or 20 days, or he could have given 10 days with a discount.
Right.
All kinds of, I mean, so
10 net 30.
The cool thing about it is that business is kind of very highly creative. I mean, you're putting together stuff, you're putting together business plans from thin air. I mean, and you're dreaming this stuff up. And unless you sit down and say, how do I do this and dream this stuff up, it's never going to get done. The first thing a company has to do, the very first thing a company has to do is have a really good product, figure out your market, to your point, and so you have to have a very, very good customer deliverable, because the customer is always number one. So any good company has to start off with having a product that people are going to want. And by the way, I always think that all companies solve problems, for people. They're making life better for people. They're providing a service.
Yeah. What pain are we solving?
You're solving some pain for somebody. But then you got to take that customer deliverable and wrap it into a really potent business model. That's the trick. And so, it's interesting. Like you could have a product like a search engine. So you have Google who comes up with a search engine. And at the time when Google came up with a search engine, it was a really novel thing because who they were competing with before that was America Online.
Right.
And if anybody can remember far back enough to if anybody can remember far back to AOL was the first website, you know, I guess search aggregator.
Aggregator.
And
Yep.
yeah, and what you would do is you go on to Apple and you would sort of say, I want to fly, I want to travel, or I want to look up this or that. And there were certain menus that you could look up for different topics, right? And Google basically did away with all that. They said, oh, forget that. You know, we're not going to have a menu. We're going to just have like this empty square box in the middle of your screen. And you could type anything you want to in it. And we're going to give you whatever it is, you know, and we're going to give it to you fast, and we're going to give it to you so it's applicable. And that was a novel thing that was really giving customers exactly what they wanted. So then the trick is, how do you turn this great customer deliverable into a business model, right? I mean,
from a hobby to let's make money.
Yeah, you know, and at the time, you know, Sergey Brin and Larry Page had a chance to sell Google out for, I can't remember the number. It was like $100 million or something like that, and they almost did it. You know,
that's a lot of money.
It was a fortune. I mean, they were graduate students at Stanford, so it was a fortune for them. I mean,
they were thinking that buys a lot of beer.
Yeah, and they had some venture capital, but all of them would have made some money doing this. And they decided not to do this, you know, and they ended up crafting a business model that was so flat good, you know, by charging advertising and getting the words, advertising AdWords and stuff like that people buy today on Google, and placement ads and that kind of stuff. They got so good at this. And their business model became so potent that they probably unexpectedly became billionaires almost overnight too, by the way. I mean, just because they crafted this really elegant business model around an elegant product. But so the trick is, that's the trick. It's like, you've got this great product. Now, how do I turn that into something, into a business model? And by the way, before Google, there was nobody that did what they did. So you were creating the business model from whole cloth. I mean, you're just creating from thin air. And so that's kind of what's fun. And one of the things that's fun about me in business, and one of my passions, is like just thinking about solving that problem for what's the best way to do this? And like, how could I, you know, how could I get this done in a way that, by the way, what you're trying to do is to make as much money for your shareholders as possible. I mean, so the customer might be number one, but it turns out the shareholder's number two, because if you can make a lot of money for shareholders, then your company's going to be worth a pile. And if your company is worth a pile, then you can give stock to all your employees and stuff, and you're going to make your employees pretty rich. And there are a lot of rich Google employees out there. And you're going to make your communities better off, because you can give away a lot of money and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, when people talk about all the stakeholders in business, you can help them, but you got to first have a great customer deliverable. And then the second thing you got to have is something that makes money for shareholders. And then you're off to the races. Now you have a company that's one of the most desirable places to work for, and all that kind of stuff. If you can get those first two things done.
Right. You know, one of the things, and we've only got about 5 minutes left. This has been such a great discussion. As I'm thinking about all of this, I really do wonder, how much does luck, you know, just come into this, you know, being in the right place at the right time, selling books out of your garage, making a computer in your garage. I mean, you know, all of these things, you know, did they have a crystal ball? I mean, you know, it really does make me wonder, you know, was it they were in the right place at the right time? Or, you know, and which I think is actually not the case, right? We think they were lucky, they were but no, they were very strategic about it.
Yeah, I think that for people, you know, there are usually two kinds of people in business that are successful. One kind of person is a person who owns a very big piece of a small pie, like, you know, a mid-sized company, and they own a lot of it. And the second kind of person is the person that owns a very small piece of a big pie. You know, I'm like the poster child for that second guy. I created a company worth $10 billion, but I only owned a small piece, right? You know, very, very small piece. But a small piece of $10 billion is still real money, right?
Yeah, nothing to sneeze at.
Right. So So those are the two kinds of people.
Mhm.
The people who are on the Forbes 400 that you talk about,
Mhm.
they're people that actually own pretty big pieces of big pies,
Mhm.
which is a freak of nature, and the way they got to own big pieces of big pies was to uh, create businesses that ended up exceeding any rational
Mhm.
expectation,
Mhm.
either their own or anybody else's. And they were able to benefit from that. And so
Mhm.
I think that there is actually a certain level of luck to that. I mean,
Mhm.
it could be timing, it could be, because you're definitely an outlier. I mean,
Mhm.
but you know, but is it lucky to create a company where you're worth a multimillionaire?
Mhm.
No, I don't think so. I think that, everybody luck always helps on
Mhm.
everything. But I think that if you're somebody who's persistent and you want to
Mhm.
try it, you understand the name of the game, you're
Mhm.
trying to create a company that's worth more than it costs to create. Those opportunities
Mhm.
are wide and many. And
Mhm.
um, and and by the way, all the people that you see in the Forbes 400, those people would have been multimillionaires probably anyway in some
Mhm.
other business.
Right.
Being a
Yeah.
billionaire, that's a different story.
Mhm.
But being a multimillionaire,
Mhm.
sure, those people are
Mhm.
exactly the kinds of people that would be multimillionaires, and
Mhm.
it wouldn't be lucky,
Mhm.
because they're good, they're thoughtful, they
Mhm.
create a great business model, and they could have done it in other
Mhm.
businesses for sure.
I love it. But wouldn't you love to be able to jump in that time machine, right? And go back to when Bezos or Jobs and Wozniak were chatting and just be a part of those first conversations. And, because when you're thinking, hey, I want to start this business, you obviously think you want it to be successful. But I would, I really did they, so Amazon and Apple, were they really thinking, or, Elon Musk? I mean, all of those, I'm going to be one of the wealthiest people in the world. And I mean,
No.
that just, you wonder, were they, and were they the kids at 5 years old who were saying,
Um,
this is going to be me? I mean, it would just be very interesting to have that, the Wayback Machine, and see,
there,
what were they
yeah.
like?
There are entrepreneurs like that, and you've had people on your show that
Mhm.
started being entrepreneurs at age 8 or whatever,
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that entrepreneurship is not necessarily something that you're born with. I mean, I
Uh-huh.
think that people, all of us have careers,
Mhm.
and somewhere at some point in our career, there could be a chance to basically start
Mhm.
a business,
Mhm.
and you see an opportunity, you see a window, and
Mhm.
you say, I want to just give this a shot.
Mhm.
Some people get out of college never wanting to work for anybody; they want to work for themselves.
Right. Mhm.
Now, that doesn't mean they think they're going to be multimillionaires or
Mhm.
billionaires. But they want to work for themselves, and
Right. Mhm.
they hope they're going to be financially successful,
Mhm.
and because that's definitely sort of part of
Mhm.
it. But they want to work. They want
Mhm.
the appreciate joy to wake up every day,
Mhm.
go to work,
Mhm.
not have somebody tell them what to
Mhm.
do, have themselves be the boss. That's what they want to do. I mean,
Mhm.
and uh, do they? I know very few people that actually have a goal saying, I want to be a multimillionaire. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
they have a goal of wanting to be financially
Mhm.
successful and pay, have their
Mhm.
kids go through college and all that
Mhm.
sort of stuff,
Mhm.
but if your goal is just to make money, I mean, I think it's a sort of a hollow goal.
Mhm.
I mean,
Mhm.
I think most great people want to make a difference, and they
Right.
want to make a
Mhm.
difference in other people's lives. They
Mhm.
want to have customers
Mhm.
that get benefit from their
Mhm.
existence.
Right. Like we said, solve their pain. Mhm.
They want to solve problems
Mhm.
for folks, and then making the money can be a side benefit from
Mhm.
that. If you know something about business models and you're creating businesses, then you're going to say, okay, there are two or three things I like to do.
Mhm.
I'm going to do the one that has the best business model,
Mhm.
right?
Right. Mhm.
It's sort of like if you wake up in the morning, you say, well, I could do this for a living because I like that, but I could also like this and I
Mhm.
like that.
Mhm.
Then, my advice to people is just do the one that's going to make the most
Mhm.
money for you. I
Mhm.
mean, why not? I mean, if you like doing it, given two or three choices,
Right.
go
Mhm.
for the door that's got the
Mhm.
most money behind it.
Right.
But for sure, when you're creating a business, if you leave the business model design till late,
Mhm.
that's where you get kind of risky, right?
Right.
Because
When you're having to
let's
catch
say
up. Mhm.
you're having to catch up, and
Mhm.
maybe you're having to fire people that you
Mhm.
hired because you
Mhm.
you you did it all wrong. So you're disrupting your whole
Mhm.
business. you're hurting morale,
Mhm.
it's costing you a lot of money. By the way, it's costing you pain.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Right.
so if you can do it early on
Mhm.
and have a feeling for where
Mhm.
you're going, then that's definitely the best
Mhm.
place to be.
I love it. Well, oh my, this really has been absolutely fascinating. And I think, so beneficial to folks. But if they're going, how do they find you? And, obviously you are the author of the book, The Value Equation, which is a great resource. But tell us how people find you and what are the services that you provide?
Sure. Well, you can find me you go to the website of thevalueequation.com and certainly
Mhm.
find the book. If you want to find me, you can get me on LinkedIn. So I have a LinkedIn profile,
Great.
which
We've got
I
that
know I
link in the
sent to
show
you.
notes.
So you got I will have a website that's ChristopherHVolk.com. So that's coming. So you'll
Soon,
be able to
yes.
get me
Mhm.
there. Um, and if you reach out to me on certainly on LinkedIn
Mhm.
and text me and you
Mhm.
have some questions, I'm happy to help answer them.
Mhm.
Um, right today, I'm on a couple boards
Mhm.
and I spend a lot of time teaching and
Mhm.
guest
Mhm.
lecturing and doing podcasts like this to sort of get the message out.
Mhm.
And I've got some views on how business educations need to be really altered a
Mhm.
little bit to really emphasize business
Mhm.
model design, which, by the way,
Mhm.
is no business schools. I mean, strangely enough,
Right.
what I'm talking to you about today is not really widely taught in business
Mhm.
schools. So,
Mhm.
but should be.
Right.
And
Right.
so I have a
Yeah.
mission to change
Mhm.
that. And but I'd be happy to do that if you want me to come speak to your group. I could be persuaded.
Mhm.
So, but I'm not a public speaker by
Mhm.
profession. I mean, this is not what I do. I did this not to create a living out of it,
Mhm.
out of doing it. This is really kind of a giving back thing for
Mhm.
me. So it's important for me
I love
to
it.
change how the dialogue is
Mhm.
done.
I love it. And yeah, that's I think one of the things that we've alluded to, directly and indirectly is how is it that you can set yourself up so then you can give back? And for some people, that's big. For some people, that's small. But how can you give back? And I love that that is what you are doing now. And yeah, has been a fascinating discussion. But is there anything that you want to leave everyone with? What is your final thought?
Um, well, uh, I would say that the world is full of two kinds of people. I mean, those that make things happen, and those that let things happen to them.
Mhm.
And so for the audience, it's important for you to be among those people that make things happen, which means that you're taking charge of your own life. You're deciding exactly what you want to do. You're uh, going forward. You're not waiting for somebody just to pat you on the head and give you a promotion, which is the people that make that let things happen to them are hoping for good things to happen
Mhm.
to them, but good things don't always just happen to those who wait. They say it helps to actually take charge and to increase your odds of success by making things happen.
I love it. I love it. Well, I'm Deb Creer. I've been having such a wonderful discussion with Christopher Volk, the author of The Value Equation. And to everyone, have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.